All right, Dr. Aaron Warner, and welcome to another episode of Independent Insights, where we share quick conversations on topics relevant to running efficient and profitable independent private practices, also taking the best care for our patients. Thanks to Vision Source for supporting this. It's their mission to enable independent optometrists to achieve their full potential. I had a great conversation today with my good friend, Dr. Joe DeLoach, Practice Compliance Solutions. We could talk forever, but today we talked about audits, why we get audited by third-party payers, a little bit about fraud and abuse, the difference between the two of them, and really some resources to learn the rules of the game. So not only do we stay out of the trouble with audits, but it's empowering, and how that knowing the rules of the game empowers us to do more, take better care of patients, provide better standard of care, and in doing all of those things, run better and more profitable practices. So enjoy the conversation. As always, share with a friend, leave us some comments, subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and enjoy the episode. All right, Joe, well, this is fun. I always enjoy getting to catch up and chat with you, and this time we're recording the conversation. One topic that I want...
Some of them we shouldn't.
The safer conversations. Exactly. That's why we're doing it in the morning before we've got a tequila in front of each of us. One of the topics that I've heard a lot from doctors, and I'm sure you have as well, is it feels like we're seeing audits happen more frequently from all different payers, both from medical payers and from managed vision care payers. So I want to hit a little bit on why they have to audit. Are we seeing more of them, or is it just feeling like we're seeing more of them? And then I want to dive into some of the misconceptions that I think we have in regards to getting paid and how audits work. So let's start off with just why audits. Why do they audit us? Why do they look at us particularly? Whatever the case may be. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, why audits? Audits are certainly nothing new. They've audited forever. Part of their charge as payers, whether they be public or private payers, is to show that they're making good use of the money of their business. And they do that by checking up on, whether or not doctors are doing things the right way. And audits have always been very profitable for payers. There was a real significant quote about 6 or 8 years ago from the medical director of Aetna that he said that audits are actually the most profitable part of our business. That actually is a horrible statement to come out of their mouth, because that just shows the pervasiveness of, the problem in medical reimbursement. So, why? Number one, they have a charge to do that. Number two, it's low-hanging fruit. It's easy picking. Because no matter which profession you look at, there's a significant amount of problems with correct billing and coding, and unfortunately, a significant amount of just flat-out fraud. Fraud is even like an organized crime syndicate. So, there's massive amounts of problems. So they're looking for, not only fraud, but just abuse, which is a lot of what we deal with, as medical providers, is we're just abusing the system. Unfortunately, there's a pretty fine line between fraud and abuse. So that's the two reasons they do it. It's horribly profitable for them to do so. You did ask why us, and that's probably even a more problematic answer. Because it goes back to that old, why does the robber rob the bank? Well, optometry right now is looked at as a bank because we tend to have a reputation of not so much in the fraud arena, but certainly in the abuse arena. And we'll talk later about why, I suppose. But we are kind of targeted because we're not doing a stellar job of properly coding correctly for what we can or could do.
Got it. So you brought up fraud and abuse. Real quick, what's the difference between the two, and how would A scenario
Yeah,
where you would see each of them.
yeah. It used to be relatively clear. Fraud was a flat out, intent to be a criminal. I mean, absolutely, we're billing for things literally we didn't do. That's fraud. We're lying. So
Yep.
abuse was more that the system is set up to do it correctly a certain way, and we aren't really following those guidelines correctly. Um, the problem is they changed the language some time ago to say that doctors basically have an obligation to know the correct way to do it. So that really blurs the lines between fraud and abuse. Now, most everything we're seeing coming down in audit circles falls into the abuse category. The fraud get headlines because they're big. And those usually, I mean, we have one going on right now, but those usually are turned over to the Department of Justice to investigate because those are all criminal activities going on. So most of what we see that we're doing or seeing within optometry, probably within medical profession in general, is abuse. We just don't, we either don't know we're doing it wrong or we're pushing the envelope, which I'm sure we'll talk about, where do we get the ideas to push the envelope later.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into that, because I think that by far and away our intent is always good. There's not a malicious intent. We think we feel we're doing the right thing, and sometimes what we think is the right thing, even logically what is the right thing, isn't the right thing based upon the rules set up for us. And I can see where abuse would certainly play into that. One of the things I think that challenges us is that we submit a claim to see if it goes through, and we get paid. And we look at that as a green light that says, hey, well, if they paid it, this must be the right thing to do. And I think, unfortunately, some of us have learned the hard way that isn't the case. But talk to us why a payer would pay us on a claim that we put in, even though it may not be right, and then how that works when they come back and audit and say, hey, this wasn't right. What are the repercussions?
Yeah. Well, I think I did a podcast with Chris Wolf a few years ago, and we actually talked about this, and it's like, I think there's an overestimation of the sophistication of payers. We would think they're so sophisticated that if we did anything wrong, it would just jump up on their computers. And that's just not the case. They usually, in general, if you file a claim, most of the time you're going to get paid, even if it was totally fraud. I mean, if I just filled out a claim and sent it in that said I did cataract surgery on Mrs. Jones on Tuesday, if I put the right CPT and diagnosis and fill the form out correctly, I'm going to get paid, even though it was total fiction. Now, that's not what you're talking about. You're talking more about like, I filed a claim. I did OCT and a fundus photo on the same day, and I got paid for both, even though we absolutely know that is breaking a national edit. But I got paid. So the reason I got paid is some of the payers just aren't sophisticated enough to automatically tag that as a abusive or incorrect claim. So the problem we run into is exactly what you described is, in meetings, sometimes from the podium, unfortunately, but a lot of times more so on blogs, we get this constant, I did it this way and I got paid. Well, getting paid just absolutely means nothing. The only thing that really matters is how much of that money you keep when an auditor comes in and scrutinizes the situation and says, well, you got paid, but now you get to pay me back. The other thing that I'll sneak in there before I forget is there's another thing that comes up, and this has happened many times and in optometry, is I got paid, and I got paid for a long time, and no one said anything. And then all of a sudden, I get asked to submit hundreds of thousands of dollars back for something they were paying me for a long time. And it's like, do they have that right? Well, literally, even if it's the payer's mistake, they have the right to get the money back. So we had a monumental case where a payer was paying for vision therapy services over a 5-year period, even though it was not a stated benefit of that payer. They finally went back and recouped 5 years of claims, stating this is not a covered benefit. So unfortunately, these rules don't work in our favor. It works in the payer's favor because they can even do it wrong, but they still get to get the money back. So it's back to these magical, very, very bad words of I'm getting paid. It just doesn't matter if you got paid when the auditor comes in, if it wasn't correct.
Got it. And where is the ultimate place to go and look at the rules for what I can submit, what I can't submit, what the rules are?
Yeah. So there's several places to find out what I like to call the truth of the matter. One is we have these 5 fraud and abuse laws in the United States, and that's where a lot of the core principles come from of how you have to do this. Those are probably the least read and least presented from the podium rules that are out there, and they're kind of the core principles. The 2 biggies are the False Claims Act and the Anti-Kickback Statute. There's lots of rules. Example, people have heard all along you can't waive copays. That's like against the law. You can't just waive copays or deductibles. And I hear all the time, it's like, well, Medicare says that. And Medicare never said that. That's actually in the anti-kickback statute. So a lot of these core principles are back there. The granddaddy of all of them is the False Claims Act that says basically, I can summarize hundreds of pages by saying you're obligated to do it the right way or we get our money back. That's pretty much the False Claims Act in one sentence. The second source would be definitely payer provider manuals because they pretty much spell out what they're willing to pay for and not pay for and under what situations. Now, a lot of times people say, well, I looked it up. I didn't see the policy on vision therapy in there. And what that means, it's kind of like if you're involved in legislation in optometry and you go to a legislator and say, what do you think about my bill? And they say, I like that bill. That means nothing. They have to say, yes, I'm going to vote for you, or no, I'm not going to vote for you. Well, that's the way these payer provider, contracts are too. If they say they cover it, they do. If it's silent, they don't. So that's the second best place. The third is we do have within our profession some really good people that really know this stuff from a factual, ethical presentation standpoint. Certainly within Vision Source, Chris Wolf is one of those people. It's a short list, I will tell you, but there are some people. I always say that anytime you're either reading an article or listening to a webinar or at a podium, and the minute it starts talking about getting paid or this is a good way to make more money, leave. Because most of the time that means we're deviating away from what the rules probably say. You do have to couple that with making sure you want to get paid for everything you're doing correctly. But the rules are kind of in your favor there. You don't have to push the envelope on this stuff. You just have to do it the right way. The money's there to get. You don't have to push the envelope. So that was it.
Yeah, well, the
fraud and abuse laws, the provider manuals. I left one out. CPT and ICD. And it's like no one wants to go read CPT and ICD, but those are almost kind of like Bibles of reimbursement. So that, the provider manuals, and then the individual payer directives. That's the last one I didn't add in. So Aetna's going to have their rules. CMS is going to have their rules. The CMS carrier for your state is going to have rules that may be different than another state. It gets really complicated, but it's not rocket science. I think we make billing and coding way harder then it has to be. I have a slide in my presentation that says coding in one slide. Just be an ethical doctor and do what's right for the patient, and the money will follow. Any questions? And it really, it is a little bit more complicated than that, but it really is not much more complicated than that. If you make the decision based on what's best for the patient and what's ethical to do, you're going to follow the rules 90% of the time.
Nope, that makes complete sense. And certainly the changes in the 99 codes that happened, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
2021.
The streamlining of them made it a whole lot easier to get paid more and not paid more, but paid appropriately for the services that we're
well put.
Or we're rendering.
Well put.
So,
yeah, and
now sometimes.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I would like to make one comment about that, because you are correct, and we still have very low adoption within optometry of the 99,000 codes. And I think it's carryover from pre-2021, where in general, and I was probably one of the ones from the podium just scaring the pants off people about using the 99,000 codes, because you're going to pick the wrong code. Typically you're going to overcode, and they were a huge audit target. So we almost tried to talk people out of using them. And literally what they did in 2021 just threw the switch 180 degrees. So now we're honestly, even people like me are trying to, undo that scare we put into people, long ago, because now they're fairly straightforward. They're not difficult to use. And you're right. It does more appropriately reimburse, for what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And once I took a couple of courses, yours being one of them, Chris also took, because I wanted to get as much insights as we could. Not only is it fairly straightforward, but it's easier to take care of patients, because I'm not worried about checking off boxes. I'm just worried about doing what's right, as you said. And lo and behold, I'm getting paid appropriately, which also happens to be more than what I was probably coding for previously, level wise.
Yeah.
Now, one thing we hear is that when I call so we've got the manuals, we've got the books, we've got the resources you talked about, and most of us aren't going to read them, if we're being honest. So we pick up the phone and we call the 800 number for whatever third-party payer. And we ask a question, can I do this? And we get an answer. How much weight does that interaction have, or does it carry any weight at all?
0. So, again, most of these answers come out of my presentations I give, and it says, the worst sources of correct coding information, and number one is the payer help desk. You just have to remember, these are low wage earners sitting answering a phone, who most, I guess I'm being judgmental, but most of them probably don't like what they're doing, and they certainly don't like talking to you, the disgruntled doctor or office manager or billing specialist. And they tend to not know what their payers rules even are. So even in Medicare, it's not a great source of information. So, you knock them out. The next logical question is, well, where can I get good information? And, I hate to drill it down to what we already said, but it is the truth. If someone's looking for the magic funnel of all the right answers, it doesn't exist. If you're going to do this correctly, it does require a little bit of effort on your part to learn what the rules say. The beauty is, all we have to deal with is the eyeball. And so the rule, the policies, even the number of procedures and diagnoses. Think if you were a pediatrician, and you basically have to know the rules from CPT page 1 to, page 1,000 and whatever. We have it easy, and we're smart people. There's no reason we can't do this correctly.
Yeah. I think it's just not fun and sexy. There's nothing sexy about the CPT code.
Well, this whole thing falls into compliance with the law in general, and there's nothing fun about any of them. The only thing fun is running your business and seeing patients. All the rest of this peripheral stuff that was put upon us, it's not fun. And those of us like myself and Chris and John Rampakis that somehow eat all this stuff up, we must be deviants to enjoy this. But you do kind of have to get out there and make the effort or suffer the financial repercussion.
That reminded me of a video clip I saw, interview, I believe it was Kobe Bryant, who was talking about one of the reasons he excelled in the game, aside from his insane work ethic. And he said he read the referee's instruction manual from front to back. So he knew every aspect of the game, even what was expected and required of the referees. And when you know the rules, you can use the rules to your advantage. You're not cheating, you just know the rules. And and I thought that was pretty insightful. And you, Chris, and John, maybe you're the Kobe Bryants of this, and you figured it out ahead of the rest of us, and you're reading to know the rules, because then you can play appropriately.
Oh, you made a really good comment. So Kobe says, I understand the game and can play the game better because I understand the rules. That's brilliant. It really applies to billing and coding as well. If you really understand the rules, you're going to find that they don't limit what you can do, and many times they expand what you can do. So I'll use one example of, probably anybody that listens to our little discussion here, every patient that comes in with rheumatoid arthritis on Plaquenil, they know exactly what to do. They know exactly what tests to run, blah, 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 blah. And there's not a single other systemic drug that they test patients for in their practice, even though the list of systemic medications that cause ocular complications is probably 30 deep, and no one is paying attention to those patients. That's leaving money on the table, number one. Number two, it's really not following standard of care, because we should be following those people appropriately. So doing this correctly is not limiting your bank account. If you really know, it's like Kobe said, you can do better if you really understand the rules.
That's yes, genius and freeing. I like that idea of being freeing and knowing what to do more. Now, where do I start? If I'm listening to this and I haven't, done more than listen to you or Chris or John talk in a lecture, certainly there's courses that I can take. But what are some steps to say, where am I at right now? What am I doing right? What can I fix? And how do I make sure I'm doing it right going forward?
Yeah. Couple of things. Certainly anyone listening to this is smart enough to self-study. And we noted resources you can go to and read what's there. So self-study can certainly do it. Number two, try to pay attention and get in the room or on the web with those people we're identifying that really are giving the correct information, and pay attention to that. To the negative of that, it's like stay off the blogs, except for one. Budox is a really good blog, but Budox is monitored, and they don't literally allow for craziness to occur, much less for inaccurate information to be spread. It's always going to be challenged in the Vision Source Budox system. But the open, I don't want to call out any of them to make some of my colleagues mad, but there's a bunch of billing and coding blogs and et cetera, et cetera. And this is a common discussion on open blogs. And I just, I follow them. It's funny. I think I said this in a lecture the other day. I wouldn't even open them up and look at them. I follow them to get lecture material. And it's not good lecture material. It's everything you're doing wrong. And it's just unfortunately true. Now, there's a couple of really good people on there. Gadsby, Cheatham. I mean, there's some people on there that kind of know what's going on. Unfortunately, they're dwarfed by the I'm getting paid people. So the one thing to stop doing is paying attention to what the blogs tell you, because they're typically financially generated. Third, certainly within Vision Source, even outside Vision Source, and I keep going back to Chris, but Chris has a coding primer, iCode education, I think it's called. It's a series of programs that you can, very reasonably subscribe to. Here I am pushing Chris, but it's a really good system. People that are PCS clients, we have literally what we call a reimbursement manual that goes through, all the core stuff. So anybody that's a client has access to that. So that's good. Number 3, and this is probably the most important thing: get your records audited by a professional. Identify what you're doing wrong. And there's 2 big reasons to consider that. Number 1, it will point out the things you're doing. Actually, 3. It will point out the things you're doing incorrectly as far as your billing and coding goes. Now, this has to be an extensive audit by someone that knows what they're doing. And I've already mentioned 3 people again, and all 3 of those, myself, Chris, and John, all do audits. Number 2, it will help identify what you're not doing. So if we're going to do these audits appropriately, we want to look at what you're doing incorrectly that you may have to pay back, but also money you're leaving on the table by just not following standard of care, types of protocols. That is probably one of the most significant ways, I think, to start understanding what you're doing wrong and what you're doing right.
Yep. No, absolutely. It's funny. We talked LeBron, or basketball. I keep saying LeBron, Kobe, and all of the big stars that we know of in sports, in acting, and music. They've got coaches trying to refine what they do. You're the best in the game. You're still trying to get better. You're the best in the game. You're still trying to get better. You're paying somebody to watch you and make you better. Yet we operate in the dark. And the idea of somebody watching us, the idea of somebody coming in and auditing, let alone us paying you or Chris or John to come in and look at my records and tell me what I did right and wrong, is a scary thought until you go through the process and realize that it's a very empowering thought. But it's an interesting concept to me that the sports heroes that we look up to have figured this out, and but we haven't gotten quite there yet.
Yeah, one of the quotes you'll hear a lot from the big coding people is, you don't know what you don't know, and that's more than billing and coding, but it is true. You don't know what you don't know, so it shouldn't be a fear. You said empowering. It should be empowering to know what you're doing correctly and doing incorrectly, and it's a terrific investment. I know the fees for all these people. It's crazy cheap money for the empowering knowledge that you're going to get from that. So that I would very strongly, say that's one of the top things you need to do is set your baseline. Where am I now? You may find that you're pretty dadgum good. And then, the goal from there is not a very, rugged path. And you may find out that, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And so you got a lot of work to do. But that's a really good way to set the starting point.
Well, the idea just hit me. We started at the beginning about audits, and you made the comment that that somebody in the auditing or the payer community said that that's their largest source of revenue is audits. I almost think that investing the time and the money to learn the rules and then have you or Chris or John come and audit, that same principle applies to us, right? The dollars and the time that we spend here will pay dividends, and if the one principle is being used by the insurance company for them to make money, we should use the same principle for us, right? Let's audit ourselves. Let's figure out how to do better and be more empowered, be freer. And by taking better care of patients, we get paid more appropriately for our services.
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody knows they're kind of getting crunched lately with reimbursement going down and all that. And there's really only two ways to take home more money. And one is to increase the money you're bringing in, and two is to decrease what you're losing. And I think that's the part people don't really latch on to enough until they're one of the unfortunates that get stung by one of these big audits. That all that work and, honing your multiple sale protocols, all that stuff and buying, diagnostic instrument, it can go out the window with one bad audit. So it's essential to not have the leak, on the backside. And the only way you can stop that is to do things correctly. And I want to add one point here. And I go back to a conversation that Chris and I had where we talked about when you speak about audits, unfortunately, sometimes the response is fear, and it really shouldn't be fear. So a lot of docs operate their billing and coding under fear, and invariably they're going to do it wrong if they do that. So we shouldn't fear the reimbursement potentials, and we shouldn't fear what the rules say. We should, what that typically leads to, if you look at billing patterns, and I'm going to strictly talk about medical here for a minute, but if you look at the amount of medical care optometry is delivering, we have this rather weird graph that starts out with a big hump at the beginning, which is people doing nothing, either because they choose to, or a lot of times because they fear that Aetna's going to come in and take all my money back away from me. So I just won't do anything. Then we have this, unfortunately smaller in the middle where I think is a good balance. And then we have this small hump at the end that spikes to the roof, which is the true abusers, even some of the fraudulents. So it's a weird hump. What we want is that big hump in the middle. And we really don't have that in optometry. But we should.
Yeah, well, education's going to get us there. And so I appreciate what you and Chris and John and others are doing. I know they don't teach us this in school. I got my thoughts on that, and school's job is to get us to pass the boards so that we can become doctors, but the individual responsibility is on us. I would love it if they did. But they've got their hands full teaching us everything they're teaching us just to get to this point.
Yeah, that's an interesting debate. What their responsibilities are or not, but I think they could do a better job, and I'll leave it at that.
Yep. So cool. Well, thanks, Joe. Appreciate the time as always, and look forward to having more discussions with you on compliance, how to keep doing a better job of doing what we do, and so that we can keep taking care of patients, our practices, and driving the profession forward.
Anytime, buddy.
Awesome. The hard part was slowing down on that because we could have kept going for another 2 hours.
Yeah, when Chris and I did, it was 2 or 3 years ago, we did one on billing and coding, and I think we went well over an hour, and we both got through and went, this could have gone all afternoon. I mean, it's just, because then you get into the specifics of what are the main things we're doing incorrectly, which is not as big a list as you might think. I mean, it falls into probably 5 or 6 things that if we eliminated those 5 or 6 things, people would be 90% better off. So again, we don't have a big reimbursement. Yeah, we don't have a huge reimbursement Bible to go by. It's pretty small because we're a single organ specialty. But we predominantly do about 5 or 6 things incorrectly.
And when I look at those 5 or 6 things, it almost, I hate the word systemic, but it feels like it's just a bad copy getting passed on. It's bad habits that are perpetuated is the right word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
They're just are perpetuated, and somebody's not stopping it and saying, no, this isn't how we do it. This isn't the right way. There's a better right way, or a righter right way, where you can still make just as much money, perhaps even more.
Yeah.
But you're not playing the game.
Yeah. I use the example of, I have a picture of John Bon Jovi with his bare chest, when he was 22 years old and all hot looking. And I use the example of a lot of optometrists live their professional career off one of his songs called Living on a Prayer. And it's like, that is it. I mean, it's like they fear and know that there's all this world of rules out there, but they operate in the living on a prayer arena, which is, I just hope I don't get caught. And the reality of the situation is most of them won't get caught. So it's like a gamble that almost you are in favor instead of the house. But if you do, it's dramatic. I mean, dramatic. I mean,
yeah.
Like I said, I give you one. Are we still recording?
We are. I can stop.
Okay. Well, it doesn't matter. I'll give you a perfect example.
None of this will go on. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll give you a perfect example of this getting paid and insanity of everybody knows the right answer and does it wrong anyway. And it's credentialing. So it's billing for non-credential doctors. And the blogs invariably will go to, I've done it this way for years. I've never had a problem. I've done it this way for years. I got paid every time. On and on and on and on. I don't know of anyone who's ever been tagged for this. It goes on and on and on. Well, I do. I know a doc in Arkansas that got tagged for $176,000 for billing for non-credential providers. And when I say those numbers, it's like, that erases a whole lot of effort to run a good company when you have to write that check. There's also some misconception that like general liability would cover that if you make a mistake. It's like, no, it does not. That comes out of your bank account, and hopefully the money's there. So that's just one example of these perpetuated myths. And they get perpetuated to some degree, honestly, because a lot of doctors don't get caught. So I always talk about, the rule about, I'm not a very good rule follower until it comes to the government. But I got a lead foot and I can't stay within the speed limit to save my life. And so I'm they call it reckless indifference. I know the law and I break it anyway. And the majority of the time I don't get caught. But I pay a lot of ticket fines. I'm very honest about it. I can't seem to stay under the speed limit very well. That's a conscious decision on my part, and I paid the result of getting caught. No one's ever been issued a ticket for $176,000. Paying a traffic ticket and getting in trouble for these kinds of issues, there's no comparison. So part of it is this living on a prayer, and the prayer works a lot of times until it doesn't.
Yeah. It's interesting, the analogy with driving, because we all know what the speed limit is.
Yeah.
And so we're willingly, to your point, you're knowingly breaking it. You're knowingly saying, hey, I can, 10 miles over, I'm probably safe. 15, it's a little scary,
Yeah.
Depending on the
all the rationalization,
the red and blue. Uh-huh. And on the flip side, though, in the compliance world now, it's not just billing and coding, but all compliance. We think the rule is our rational thought. Well, this makes sense to me. Well, that's stupid, so that we don't have to follow that. And I don't know a single doc who's OSHA certified, maybe you, right? OSHA certified, HIPAA certified, expert in all of these, and a rule maker in all of these spaces to really understand the ins and outs. Just follow the rules, or at least know the rules and be comfortable with whatever gray space that you want to play in.
Yeah. Well, it's not the Army anybody signed up for when they decided to become a doctor, no matter what kind of doctor you are. We signed up to take care of patients, and some of us even enjoy the day-to-day just business person aspect of running our business. But even in that arena, we never signed up for HIPAA, for OSHA, for patient disability laws, for all the dadgum coding and billing rules, et cetera, et cetera. That's just not fun. And it's human nature to avoid things that aren't fun, that don't have a positive feedback to us. Unfortunately, all of these rules have nothing but a negative feedback. I mean, no one goes home at night and goes, I feel so much better about being a doctor because I'm compliant with HIPAA. I mean, it just doesn't happen. But what is real bad is when the opposite happens and you get stung because you're not. And it's just a whole different arena. So it's all negative. There's no feel good for doing it the right way as a rule, other than you can, and certainly in billing and coding, you can say, I'm not frauding anybody, I'm not frauding the government, I'm not frauding my patients, I feel good about that. But, the impact we look for a lot of times in running our business is the bottom line. And, it's not sexy. And following this stuff doesn't, as a rule, positively impact your bottom line. It can just severely negatively impact your bottom line.